Hi, everybody. I'm Amelia,
Tom,
and this is Monday with Jesus.
here we go.
Here we go. Right. The scripture this week is one that I think I first learned and told in the Gambia many years ago. Well, I don't know, a dozen or so years ago. So anyway, I'm going to tell it. So let me put us on speaker view here. There we are. Okay, so this is from Luke. I don't even know where it is. Luke 10. Well, it follows right on the heels of the Good Samaritan story that we had last week. All right. So Jesus and disciples are on their way to Jerusalem. And as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Now, Martha had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to everything he was saying. But Martha was distracted, preoccupied with all the things she was doing, many tasks. And then she came to Jesus and she said, Lord, can't you see that my sister's left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. But Jesus said, Martha, Martha, you are so worried and distracted by many tasks, many things. There's really only need for one thing. Mary's chosen the better part, and it is not going to be taken away from her. So that's the story, Mary and Martha. Pretty popular story with some people, not necessarily with everybody.
Not my mother.
Not your mother. Go ahead, tell about your mother.
Well, she didn't like this story because she thought that it was a put down of Martha and all the things that she did, which were, also the things that my mother did. She was always working on things, and so.
Yeah, I'm in a.
But she was also educated. She had at her own initiative gotten 2 years of college so that she was able to get a temporary teaching certificate. So she started teaching when she was 18. And so
really, she's both sides of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm in a kind of circle of the word at my church, and we have two sisters there. So when we were learning the story one time, and they said, yeah, she's the Martha, I'm the Mary, and the Martha didn't like the story very much. So yeah, there are a lot of opinions about that. I myself really like it. I'm probably more of a Martha type person too. I do remember a time when my daughter said, Mom, just sit. We were having dinner and I was getting up, doing this and that. She said, please just sit down. So it's kind of like what Jesus, would have said to Martha. But anyway, so was Jesus really, was he putting Martha down? Well, let's back up. So Martha seems to be pretty ticked with her sister. Would you say that's accurate?
I'd say that's accurate.
Okay.
Yeah. It is often read in a more detached way, so that she's one of the few times when a woman gets angry, but she is clearly really ticked at her sister and at Jesus for supporting this.
Yeah, was it appropriate how she addressed Jesus?
Well, it was let's say not typical of the ways that women would address a rabbi. So what the issue was is important in relation to understanding the story, I think, in its original context as well as now.
It may show a kind of familiarity that she had, that she felt that she could talk with Jesus this way, kind of order him around a little bit. I don't know if we get that in Luke, but in John, we know, the Gospel of John, we know that this family was very close to Jesus.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different.
Yeah, right. It's a whole different set of stories. Well, Yeah, when we talked about this, you were saying that distracted, you didn't think distracted was a great translation. You want to
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit and what might be a better word to use?
Well, Joe Fitzmyer in his commentary in the Anchor Bible has a different take on this, and that I think is really good. He says that this word, perispao, can both mean quite busy, overburdened, as well as distracted. Distracted has a degree of negative context.
Yeah.
That being overburdened or quite busy doesn't necessarily have. It doesn't have a pejorative dimension to it. And I think that's more accurate in terms of what Jesus is doing. I don't think he's putting Martha down. In fact, I think what he's trying to do is to enable her to join Mary in listening to him and being his student.
I thought that Professor Fitzmyer also had a really interesting interpretation about what was going on, the metaphor of food.
Right.
Yeah, so talk about that a little bit. That was really interesting, I thought.
Well, another way that this can be translated is that she was quite busy with many dishes, and that when he was discussing with Martha about it, he was saying Mary has chosen, the better part, to have just one dish. It's not necessary to have a lot of dishes for my visit here. One dish
is enough.
Mary's chosen the better part. That is the better thing, one dish and a simple meal. So
that's one way of understanding the better part. Is there anything more about that? It is a little strange, Mary has chosen the better part. I guess I understood that as she's chosen the best thing to do, which is to sit and listen rather than to spend all the time preparing the food. But is there some other meaning to that?
Well, I don't know that there's another meaning to that. It is clearly ambiguous, and but Jesus is in this story is on the one hand defending Mary and arguing for against this attack by her sister, but often the way in which this is often told is Mary, 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 you're distracted by many things.
You mean Martha, Martha, Martha.
Martha, Martha, Martha.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yes. In a kind of condescending manner. And I don't think that's what's going on. I think it's Martha, Martha. And it's like almost trying to calm her down because she's so preoccupied with having a big dinner and with many dishes.
Well, I do remember when we were in Israel, lots of dishes. So it is
lots of dishes.
It's a wonderful part of the hospitality, but yeah, in this case, it wasn't necessarily the priority.
Right.
So there's this wonderful image of Mary sitting, listening to Jesus. Was that common? I mean, he was a rabbi, they called him rabbi, his teacher. Was that common that there would be women who would sit as part of the group and listen to a teacher or a rabbi like that in the first century?
As far as we know, it is not typical. The rabbis would have disciples. The disciples were men. Jesus had disciples. They were 12 men. But what this implies is that there were also women who were part of his band of disciples. And that's reflected in several places in the Gospels, including An example is in the Mark story of the burial of Jesus. They're described as Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and Joseph, and many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem, and that they had served him when he was in Galilee. So the implication is that his band of disciples also included women. Well, this reflects that. That was a very radical thing in the context of the patriarchal system in the first century, and is clearly a demonstration of Jesus' inclusion of women in terms of education, so that the issue of the education of women remains a major issue. So one of the things that's happening in Afghanistan is that they're shutting down all the schools. The Taliban are shutting down the schools for women. And that was the case in Western civilization for centuries, was that women were not included in the cathedral schools. They were exclusively for men.
So you're kind of moving into my last question, which is, what are the implications of this story for ministries of peace and justice?
Well, the issues of the rights of women and of their access to education, to their rights to determine what they do with their bodies, those are major issues that are present now. And the implication of this story is that Jesus was affirming the rights of women. Now, how that could be identified and made specific, that's an ongoing question. But it's clear that this story is an example of Jesus being on the side of justice for women. And in this case, of justice for Mary in this little incident. But it is symbolic of an overall approach that has through the centuries been the case, and now is being affirmed in the ordination of women in many Protestant denominations, and in increased prominence for the role of women, and in the seminaries now more than half of the student body in many seminaries are women.
Yeah.
When I started at Union in 1962, there were 3 women in the MDiv class out of about 70. That has changed radically in the years since.
Yeah.
It's indicative of a movement that has its roots in the New Testament, of the affirmation of the full and equal participation of women.
Yeah, and something to maybe be aware of. Luke's gospel was written in a very patriarchal society. And so even though the story is rather short, it does feature 2 women. So the fact that it was included, focused on these 2 women, and ultimately has a message that Jesus wants women to be his students and his compatriots. So I think that's significant for ministries of peace and justice as well.
It isn't, it isn't a major theme, but the fact that it's included is itself a sign of Luke's affirmation of this highly distinctive thing in the traditions of Israel.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal that it was included in the gospel.
All right, so this is an easy short story to learn. Tom always says every story is easy to learn. I would not agree with that, but I would agree this story is pretty easy to learn, and it's a wonderful story. So try to do that this week, and have a wonderful week, everybody. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.